On behalf of the Institute for Innovation and Prosecution, I want to thank you for joining our virtual panel on prosecutors and sentence review. This session is being recorded, so you'll be able to watch the full event online on our website, prosecution.org, if you could not attend the entire event today. We invite you to send questions throughout today's panel. You can click the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to send your questions directly to the host. Before we begin our panel, I'd like to read our Living Land Acknowledgement Statement, honoring both the land and culture of Indigenous peoples across our country. We want to acknowledge that the IIP is based in New York City, which is Lenape-Hoking, the Lenape homeland. We honor all of the Indigenous nations and their land with great gratitude and acknowledge the genocide and continuous displacement of Indigenous peoples. We also acknowledge the enslaved Africans whose labor built Manhattan during the colonial era and beyond. We acknowledge the harm inflicted upon the Indigenous communities and people of color across the country, which inspires our ongoing work. Thank you, and I'm now going to turn it over to our Deputy Director, Alissa Marque Heydari.
Thank you so much, Michelle, to everyone tuning in, and of course to our panelists for joining today. My name is Alissa Marque Heydari. I'm the Deputy Director at the IIP. We are so thrilled to have a panel discussion about sentence review. To give you all a bit of background, last year California passed a bill drafted by Heydari Blout, one of our very own panelists today, and this bill allows prosecutors to review the sentences of people who are currently incarcerated and determine whether their incarceration continues to be in the interest of justice. The law gives the DAs the power to recommend to the court that a person who has already been sentenced and has already served some time be released early. There have been several people who have served years in prison and have been rehabilitated while incarcerated and who have now been released thanks to this new bill, and there is momentum growing for similar legislation in other states, which I'm hoping to hear more about through this discussion today. So let's meet our panelists. We have provided you with a link to their full-length bios in the question and answer feature, but I'll give you a quick summary of who they are. First up is Heydari Blout. She is the founder and executive director of For the People. She spent 6 years as a prosecutor for the San Francisco District Attorney's Office. She spent 3 years leading criminal justice reform efforts in California, including on behalf of Californians for Safety and Justice, where she ran the statewide implementation of Prop 47. Her work helped promote second chances for thousands of people previously convicted of lower level felonies. Heydari is also a legislative consultant and drafted and secured the passage of AB 1115, which provided expungement relief, and AB 2942, the new California law we're going to be talking about today. We also have Nathaniel Williams, an activist from Compton, California, who founded a nonprofit organization called Choices for Freedom. Mr. Williams spent 32 years of his life in the prison system after being arrested as a youth and sentenced as an adult at the age of 17. And after returning to his family, he founded Choices for Freedom as a means to create change through social and criminal justice reform. Mr. Williams works with incarcerated individuals directly to facilitate their own rehabilitation and healing, as well as to force change through the prison system by testifying for reform laws. We also have today District Attorney Jeffrey Rosen, who's a top prosecutor in Santa Clara County, California. He is a nationally recognized leader in criminal justice reform. Since 2011, Mr. Rosen has overseen the largest prosecutor's office north of Los Angeles, serving a population of almost 2 million people. He was one of only 3 elected DAs to support Prop 36, which reformed the 3 strikes law and allowed thousands of nonviolent offenders to be safely released from prison. He was one of only 2 elected DAs to support Prop 47, which reclassified drug possession and minor theft crimes from felonies to misdemeanor, and he was instrumental in passing Senate Bill 10, which eliminates cash bail in favor of a more fair pre-trial release procedure. Last, but certainly not least, we have David Singleton, whose long career in public service has included the Legal Action Center for the Homeless in New York City and his work as a public defender for 7 years. Mr. Singleton joined the Ohio Justice and Policy Center as its executive director in July 2002. And a part of what David's organization does is represent people who have served significant portions of their sentences, but can demonstrate rehabilitation within prison. And Mr. Singleton then helps to fight them for early release. So with that, Ms. Blout, I'm going to start with you. If you could tell our audience briefly, what is AB 24092, which you helped pass in California, and what led you personally to advocate for this legislation?
Sure. Well, thank you again for having us for this conversation today. I'm really excited to be here. So AB 2942 is California's DA-led resentencing law, or second look legislation. And what it does is it allows the prosecuting agency to revisit past sentences, past decisions, and in that evaluation, if it becomes clear to them that the person is serving a sentence that either is a type of sentence that is no longer given out for those types of crimes, or the person has shown a trajectory of change since they've been incarcerated, then the prosecuting agency or the DA can actually go back to court and ask the court to resentence the person and facilitate a person coming home. So that's what AB 2942 does. It's the first law in the country that is a direct legal vehicle to be able to do this. I think there's been panelists before, other prosecutors from across the country that have been trying different versions, sort of workarounds, and this is one of the first direct way for a prosecutor to be able to do this. The reason behind drafting this and pushing for this legislation in California is really born out of the fact that I knew that there were a lot of prosecutors that were trying to figure out ways to address the consequences of mass incarceration generally, the consequences of our tough on crime, sort of decades of marshaling and tough on crime policies, and we're aware that there were people that are serving sentences that are no longer in the interest of justice. But most of the existing vehicles were typically a narrow pathway through conviction review or conviction integrity, or had to fit within a constitutional framework. But by and large, prosecutors were confronting the fact that there were people that didn't fit within that, but still didn't need to be incarcerated. One, because it was costly, and two, because it's simply unjust. So that was the impetus behind working on this bill. And we're pleased to say that we were able to get this through the legislature without any opposition, sort of underlying sort of the work that I am doing is really to bring together prosecutors from across the political ideologies. And so we're really happy to be able to have done that and do the work now.
Thank you for that summary and sort of helping give our audience a landscape of what this legislation looks like. Hillary, maybe you can tell us, are there any requirements to applying the law? So for instance, you have to have served, some portion of your sentence. And then on the flip side, are there any exceptions? So, are there any people who are just precluded from benefiting from this law?
Thanks for that question, Alissa. So we wrote the law broadly, and we did that sort of in keeping with the spirit of making sure that this was the type of law that would be able to reach even the most sort of complicated types of cases. We also were very, very committed to making sure that there weren't carve-outs so that we were going to leave people behind because they were categorically, considered a violent or serious offense. We knew that there were people in prison that even if their crime was categorized as that there were still powerful redemption stories. And so we didn't want to have exclusions like that. So the law is designed to allow prosecutors in their jurisdiction to be able to craft their own criteria based on what the constituent needs are, what the constituents have said, and based on the sort of public safety vision of that particular community. So there are no exclusions, and there are no requirements of serving a certain amount of time. It really is an interest of justice question, and whether there's a justification for keeping a person incarcerated.
Thank you. DA Rosen, you actually helped draft AB 24092 with activists, including Hillary, and then you helped lobby for its passage. What led to your involvement, and why did you think, as a prosecutor, it would be good policy?
It's AB 2942. That's what the law is. That's okay. And in terms of what led me to want to work with Hillary Blout on this and to lobby for it was, it really goes back to, you mentioned that I supported three strikes reform for Prop 36. Part of why I supported three strikes reform for Prop 36 was I realized that people that were sentenced under the three strikes law shortly after it passed in the late 90s were much more likely to get 25-year to life sentences for nonviolent third offenses than those that were sentenced under the law in 2005, 2006, maybe just 7 or 8 years later, because of court cases that had changed and because of different policies in DA's offices. So at one level, I just thought this really isn't fair that this person who's being sentenced today is getting, let's say, 10 years in prison. This person is getting 25 years to life or 40 years to life or 50 or even more. So it didn't seem fair to me. And that is similar to my thinking here in terms of supporting AB 2942 and actually using it. We had several instances in our office where we wanted to resentence someone because they'd gotten too much time and they had changed, they had rehabilitated themselves, and there wasn't a legal mechanism to do that. One case I remember specifically was a man named Arnolfo Garcia, who was the editor-in-chief of the San Quentin News, a very good newspaper published by the men at San Quentin. And he'd been sentenced in our county to something like 64 years to life for residential burglaries. And he'd served 15, 16, 17 years of that sentence. He was a completely changed person. He was helping other inmates. He was publishing this newspaper. And in order to get him out, we had to create all of these legal fictions and legal hurdles to do that. It took a long time, it was expensive, and it wasn't really honest. I mean, I think we wound up saying his defense attorney was ineffective, which wasn't really true. So that was, I thought to myself, there's more than just one Arnolfo Garcia in Santa Clara County, my county. And I thought to myself as well, there are probably a lot of Arnolfo Garcias in other counties in California also. And this piece of legislation would help us to release them, in a more honest way. It's true that the law doesn't have any criteria attached to it. One of the things when I talked to my fellow prosecutors in other counties was, look, you're from a more conservative county, you're from a more liberal county, you can craft the requirements as you wish. You can use your discretion to do that. In our county, we began by saying, we'll look at people that have been sentenced to 20 years or more in custody, who've served at least 10 years, and who are not in for a serious or violent offense. And we're now looking to expand that, but that was initially what we looked at. And working with Hillary's group, I want to say there's somewhere between 7 and 10 that have been released thus far. And if you expand that to the whole state, because we're about 5% of the state's population, you're talking about anywhere from 150 to 200 men that could be released. So I think it's a good law, and I'm glad to support it, and I'm glad to implement it.
Thank you, DA Rosen. Mr. Williams, tell us about the work your organization does and how it relates to this new law in California that is allowing prosecutors to review someone's sentence when they're already in prison.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity. This law will allow a lot of people like this that's not really detected as like disproportionate in sentences. I see a lot of that, and I was sentenced under that as well, and it's not right. And before COVID, me and Hillary was scheduled to do workshops inside one of the prisons that I teach in, because I get a lot of the questions from the guys, but I'm not a lawyer, so I don't really want to give them the incorrect information. But this is part of the work we do. I'm like a referral. If I know the guys personally in there, I know the changes within, like I teach a class called Path to Restoration. It deals with undealt with trauma. It's a 6-week program inside 3 juvenile halls and 1 prison in California. So as a teacher and instructor, I'm able to develop a relationship with these guys, and I'm the expert on saying when these guys should be released, but I'm not the one that can submit them a report. And that's what I would like to do, because I'm not a staff, I'm only a volunteer. I would like to see me and other volunteers that's doing all this work within the prison be allowed to submit. Say if I get a guy that's changed and I want to see, you know, him back resentenced, I should have that power too. But right now I don't. But I know we're going to get it eventually. But I'm just here to be an expert. I'm not a professional lawyer, but I am a person that has lived experience. Like I was one of the first juvenile trials as an adult. When the DA and the judge, the prosecutors was all like, wait a minute, he's a kid, but he did a crime. We want to make an example out of all these youth and sentence me as an adult. And that was wrong, because what at what year was to determine whether I was rehabilitated? I'm the only one that can know that. And they was like, the psychs and psychiatrists were saying, well, Nate Williams' brain is not fully developed till he's 24, 25. This was 40 some years ago. Fast forward, when I got out, I'm the person that they used to be like the evidence person that went through this. And I helped with SB 260, 261 for the juveniles. My passion is with juveniles, but I'm with everybody. And this law right here, like I said, has helped a lot of people inside that may have been in prison for the rest of their lives when they could have been rehabilitated, like myself. I did 32 years, but honestly, I was rehabilitated maybe on my 25th year because I had educated myself, but I had to sit and wait on, like she said, like on somebody like Heydari to come along and change a law that allowed me to even go to present myself as showing, look, I have rehabilitated myself. I know I did something wrong, and I've learned my lesson. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I think our audience can definitely appreciate your unique perspective, and thank you for all the work that you're doing now that you have been released. Mr. Singleton, your organization, if I understand right, helps incarcerated people who do not contest their guilt get their cases reviewed to potentially shorten their sentence. Tell us about that process, please.
I will. And first, I just want to say congratulations to the folks out in California. Great work, Heydari. Great work, Jeff. Nathaniel, your lived experience is so important in this effort. Thank you for what you're doing, all three of you. So we have a project called Beyond Guilt that we started in April of 2019, and it has since freed 25 people, most of whom have been convicted of really serious crimes. There are 3 criteria. The first is you have to admit guilt or at least not contest it. And number 2, you have to have served a significant portion of your sentence. And 3, you've got to have a demonstrated record of rehabilitation. There is no set period of time you have to serve for us to be able to represent you. And so we are the workaround folks. We don't have a second look provision yet in the state of Ohio. And so we have been partnering with prosecutors who have wanted to find ways to get people out who are overpunished. We have some of the, what they would call tough on crime prosecutors that you would ever imagine. And one in particular, we've partnered with the most, and we've probably gotten, I think, about 3/4 of the people that we've represented out through that by working with that office. One of the goals of this project is not just to get individuals out, but to then help them tell their stories, to amplify their voices so that we can obliterate the narrative that people who commit violent crimes, including murders, are going to be a danger when they come back in the community. One person that we've gotten out that you can do some reading about is a man named Angelo Robinson. If you just Google Angelo Robinson and Beyond Guilt, you'll pull up lots of things. And he served 22 years of a 29-year to life sentence for murder. We got him out in August of 2019. Since then, he is working two full-time jobs, or not two full-time, one full-time job and a part-time job. He's a student, college student, making straight A's in all of his courses, and he just bought a house. He saved his money, worked hard, bought a house. I would love to have that man be my neighbor. And those are the stories that we're trying to tell as we build towards doing what Hillary and Jeff did in California in terms of getting a second look statute passed. So that's Beyond Guilt in a nutshell.
Thank you. DA Rosen, now that you have the option to resentence people who are already serving time, how does your office decide which cases to recommend for resentencing?
So we talk to different community stakeholder groups, including For the People, to say, here are the standards we're going to apply, at least initially. And the standards are that the person's sentence was 20 years or more, that they've served at least 10 years in custody, and that the offense that they're in custody for now is not a, quote, serious or violent offense, which has a specific meaning in California. Now, we did that not to say that we won't consider other cases, because we will. It's just to give a signal and a guide to nonprofit community-based groups as to what kinds of cases to bring us, at least initially, that we're most likely to look favorably upon. And when we receive these cases from, say, For the People, they do a very detailed workup on the case and generally present a very strong case for resentencing. We then will contact all the victims in the case if For the People hasn't done that, and usually they're not able to. We'll talk to the victims about the sentence the inmate received and what we're looking to do in terms of resentencing. We'll also talk to the prosecutor who initially handled the case in our office as well. And that's the procedure that we use. And as I say, we've had pretty good success with that so far in terms of resentencing several very deserving individuals. And I think that going forward, we'll look at a broader group of cases. As we do more of these and the individuals get out and they remain crime-free, which is what I expect and is what has happened thus far, I expect that I'll be a little more confident in releasing prisoners that have, let's say, slightly worse criminal histories. But again, it's a process, and that's how we approach it in our office.
So I have a whole list of questions I wanted to ask you, but we're already getting a lot of questions in the chat feature, so we'll let the audience participate. One question, I think this is probably best for Ms. Blout or DA Rosen, is does the the Pardon Board in California, I think this person meant the Parole Board, but does the Parole Board do what you're doing now under this new law? How is this function different from what the Parole Board already has the authority to do, namely having people released at a particular time?
Why don't I let Hillary answer that question?
Sure. So in California, if somebody is sentenced to what's called an indeterminate sentence, they have to wait till a certain time has elapsed before they can go to the parole board and have their case heard. Now, as somebody that has participated in both sort of opposing somebody getting released when I was a former prosecutor at the parole board, and then now having gone through the process of representing somebody at the parole board, the process, there are some similarities, but there are definitely some distinctions between those two processes. One is that I think that the way that prosecutors show up to some of the parole board hearings is typically looking at basically kind of what the person had did in the past, and maybe not looking as much at all of the trajectory of change that the person has undergone during the time that they've been incarcerated. Not to say that all prosecutors don't do that, but I think that that's an area that prosecutors may not lean into enough. And as Nate was saying, there's all of this other data that exists that prosecutors can rely on in making decisions about a person's story and how a person has changed. But I think that sometimes as prosecutors, we kind of cut ourselves off a bit from that narrative. You know, when you think back to how prosecutors show up in the courtroom, at least I can just speak for myself, the way I saw my job was I was there to represent the victims, and it was the public defender that was there to represent the defendant. And so any stories about the defendant's childhood experiences or any of the other mitigating circumstances, I kind of looked at it as those were the things that the defense attorney was going to be raising and lifting up. And so I think that there's a way sometimes that prosecutors have a bit of a guard up to some of those mitigating factors and childhood experiences. And so I think that sometimes that shows up a bit in the parole board process. What's different about the way that we're doing this work and kind of pioneering this with DA Rosen is that we go all the way back to the person's childhood, and we really try to unpack and understand what led the person to commit the crime in the first place, right? With the notion that people aren't inherently evil, but there are circumstances that are happening in a person's life that contribute to the behaviors, whether it's substance abuse or adverse childhood experiences. So we go all the way back to that and incorporate that in our quote analysis and evaluation. The other thing that we do is we talk to other incarcerated people. What are their opinions about the person? We talk to their family members. We talk to people in the community. So there is a lengthy sort of evaluation and assessment that we do. And sometimes those are beyond the things that get presented to the board. The other piece that I'll mention that's different about our process is that for many people, they won't have a chance to go to the board, even if they have all the best information and the best story to tell about themselves. They won't have a chance to do that if they are, for instance, convicted of a 3 strikes offense, and so they're serving a life sentence. So the cases that DA Rosen mentioned, ones that we have done, have actually been these life cases where, but for DA Rosen's intervention and leadership in evaluating these cases, these men would never be out. And so there's a way in which the DA initiated resentencing can accelerate the process and get people before a review body, before the judge, before the DA, as Nate said, when they've actually reached that rehabilitation point, right? And not waste taxpayer dollars and the human toll on keeping somebody incarcerated when there's no justification for it. So that's the difference about what we're doing. And I hopefully viewers hear the benefit in how we're doing it.
Thank you, Hillary. Another question from the audience is, and I think this is for any of you, what has been the response of judges to some of these petitions?
Well, I'm happy to jump in because I tried to answer that in writing, but don't know if that went through. Just speaking of the experience in Ohio, when the prosecutor is supportive, that opens up so many doors. And so we have found that when we go in and talk to a judge, and mind you, we're doing these workarounds in Ohio because we don't have a second look statute. So we're sort of doing some creative advocacy. And the judges have gone along with it when we've come with the prosecutor, and the prosecutor said, "Judge, we want you to do this in the interest of justice." And sometimes we've had the support of the family members of the person in the murder cases, the person who got killed, and they've been supportive. That helps. We haven't always had that, but that's been the experience that we've had so far in our cases, that the prosecutor has been really important in getting the judge to go along.
Yeah, and let me just jump in. I agree with that. That's been our experience as well in California, because of course, the prosecutor can't do the resentencing himself or herself. We're petitioning we're petitioning the trial court to say, we would like this person resentenced and released. And so we are advocating for that. The judges have been receptive to it. And we don't do it in the spirit of saying, oh, this is because you judge, if that judge is still on the bench, you judge made a bad decision, or you former prosecutor on the case made a bad, that's not the spirit in which we do this. We say, look, this is what the law was at the time. These are the kinds of sentences that people got at the time. But you know what? We can learn and grow and evolve as a society. And here's a person that's done very well in prison, that's rehabilitated themselves. Here are all the things that they've done. We've talked to the victims in these cases, and they are supportive of this. They don't object to it. And it's a compelling case. And the judges have been very supportive of this. I think that everybody in our country really likes a success story, a rehabilitation story, a second chance story, especially when it's true and it's real. And these are true cases and real cases. And so our experience has been that the judges have been enthusiastic about them.
Thank you both. Another question from the audience is, what is the process for a successful transition to the community in California? And do you have robust reentry services to help formerly incarcerated persons to succeed? And actually, if you don't mind, Mr. Williams, I'd like to include you in this conversation because you're very much involved in providing rehabilitation to people who have been released. So we'll throw it to all three of you, since you're all from California. So Hillary, Jeff, and Nate, if you don't mind responding to that question. I'll call on Nate first, if you don't mind.
All right. Currently, my organization is leading reentry, and what that means is the governor has ordered, I think, 6,000 people released from prison. And due to the COVID, we don't want to release people to public transportation because they don't know what's going on here. So my organization picks them up. I give them backpacks, gift cards, take them either home or to a reentry program. And not only do I drop them off, I follow up with them. Like once they're off the 10-day or 14 quarantine, I can interact with them, whether they need to go get their IDs, whatever they need for as reentry, I'm there, as well as many other organizations that does the same work. Have programs. There's 30 programs for these guys coming out. I'm just one of many other people that's there to help them. But they have to really want it themselves in order to be successful with parole. And the community has to welcome them home, not just think that just because they went to prison. I want to say this, back up a little. People are not born with criminal addictive thinking. We meet here in California. We're really unique because every year we meet in Sacramento with California Justice, and we meet with the victims and the survivors of violent crime meet, and we talk. Like, I'm able to say, like, look, my father was an alcoholic. He used to beat my mom every day. I woke up him beating her or police in the house. It was undealt with trauma. Fast forward, I wasn't born with all that. That's trauma. Fast forward, all that stuff led to me making not correct decisions, but that doesn't make me a bad person, right? And that's just showing, like, when they come home, that they too can go through the same program that I do. And I'm a vehicle that have been where they're at, and they can follow me, and I'm there to help them, navigate through whatever problems they have. That's me.
Thank you. Hillary, do you mind answering the question as well, please?
Yeah. I wanted to jump in there. I also just wanted to piggyback a little bit on what Nate was saying. as a prosecutor, as I was saying earlier, very victim focused, it is not difficult to still maintain that victim focus when we're looking at cases of people that are incarcerated, because I've yet to look at a case that doesn't have a story like Nate has said, where I feel like I'm again advocating for somebody has been victimized. So I wanted to follow up on that. And the other thing I would say, just a short answer to the question of, are there enough resources? No, there's not. There are not enough resources. And I think that COVID has also, really exposed a lot of the cracks that we have in an already fragile, under-resourced reentry system in California and nationally. We are working in a bunch of different counties. And so, I won't get into the whole justice by geography lecture, but I mean, there's something similar in terms of reentry. So if you're coming home and you're going to a really well-resourced county, wonderful. You've got housing, we've got services, there's all of these sort of resources available. But if you're going somewhere that is not as well-resourced, then it's really difficult to be able to give the person what they need so that they can have a fighting chance in their sort of reintegration. And the last thing I'll say is that what Nate talked about, you may think about reentry as a place to live, job training, but what Nate is talking about, which is, in my opinion, very under-resourced, is the hot handoff, not even the warm handoff, but who is going to pick you up at the gates? Who is going to help you make your appointment so that you can get Social Security? Who's going to explain to you how to deal with the frustrations of waiting in the DMV line, which makes all of us frustrated. But those kind of day-to-day frustrations that may come up for all of us, but are, exponentially impactful for people who have been incarcerated for 10, 15, 20 years. And so I would love to see more resources flowing specifically to organizations that are led by formerly incarcerated people, because there's all of these little gaps in what the quote experts say are needed for reentry. And so these are the types of gaps that we also need to be talking about filling.
I'd like to add one more thing. So these ride homes, I'm doing this with my own money. CDCR, the state of California, has all this money, all this COVID money. They have vans, they have cars. They could be successfully taking these early releases people home, but they're not. And some of these officers are very cruel. Like, I meet them halfway, wherever. Like, if they're coming from Southern California, I'll meet them in Central California and exchange. And it's the exchange is always at a CDCR. They have these buildings everywhere, but I never see people in these buildings. But we met there several times. And when they're transporting these guys, they're handcuffed until they're actually out the van with me. And they give them these plastic containers to use the bathroom in. They don't stop and let them use bathroom, nothing. And when they get out, twice, I said, look, put that urinal thing over in the trash can on their property. And we're across the street from malls, from public people across the street. And the correctional officer would say, no, take that over across there. Don't put it over here. I'm like, we're supposed to be protecting the society and public, and you're telling me to take it over there. It's like, and then when I get the guys too, because there's a process of them coming back in the community. You can't go, you have to be tested. So I have to take them to a hospital to be tested. There's supposed to be a social worker and a correctional officer there. One time there was nobody there when it first started, and they dropped the ball. And it was like, I had this individual out here.
Sorry, Nate, I think you might be freezing.
Correctional officer. Oh.
Sorry, Nate, I think you might be freezing. Am I right to the other panelists? I want to make sure it's not on my end. Nate, if you want, you can try to turn off your video, but don't mute yourself, and try doing it just without the video, and that might help the connection a little bit. As much as we'd like to see you talk, it might be a little better because you're cutting in and out a bit.
Okay. Can you hear me better now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, yeah. So these correctional officers have dropped the ball on many of my bringing these guys home to be safety. And their whole thing is about, they want to put, instead of being there to to meet these guys, they want to wait until I get there, come late at night, and put ankle monitors on these guys and unnecessary stuff in my own personal. But that's just been my experience with the ride homes and the staff, and it's been an experience that a lot of these guys shouldn't have to went through. And then these programs that they send them to, like they're way out. There's nobody, like Heydari said, there's no resources for the guys way out. Okay, the Bay Area, cities like LA, Oakland, Sacramento, if you're close to that area, yeah, you got it. But what about the people way up in Redding, Folsom, and way out? Those people get nothing, and they turn back to drugs because there's nothing there for them, nothing. And we're in a pandemic right now that we don't know what's going on, and we don't know what's going to happen. But I'm here to provide services wherever I can, and that's what I do.
Thank you. DA Rosen, if you could answer the question as to, what reentry services either your office provides or those that exist in your jurisdiction.
So I'm very fortunate in Santa Clara County. We've had a reentry center now for 6 or 7 years. It's something I strongly supported. It's for inmates that are being released from our county jail, as well as inmates coming from state prison and returning to Santa Clara County. It provides job training, housing assistance, educational help, a meal, and it's one place that incorporates all of those services. We try to be, in Silicon Valley, we try to talk about return on investment, ROI, and what is the return on the investment that we're getting in doing this. I mean, aside from the moral imperative to do this, the treating people with respect and dignity, which is so important, but it's also important and certainly speaks to a different side of the electorate, or speaks to a different side of people's brains to say, hey, this is practical, pragmatic, and it saves money. So the people that have gone through our reentry center, that have been released from our jails and prisons and have gone through our reentry center, have a very low recidivism rate. And by that meaning, the people that go through the reentry center are very unlikely to commit crimes again. Not only that, it's important when you look at recidivism to look at if somebody does commit a new crime, what crime is that? Like if somebody was in jail or prison for burglary or robbery, and the crime they then commit after a year is being under the influence of methamphetamine, okay, that's a crime and we want to deal with that. We want to give people drug treatment, but that's a lot different than somebody being released for robbery who then commits rape or murder. And the fact is, people getting out, the rate at which people who get out commit crimes that are more serious than the crimes for which they were sent to prison is extremely low. And that's a story that I can say that people don't believe it. Part of why people don't believe it, I mean, people in prosecutors' offices, police officers, the reason is in the criminal justice system, by definition, we do not see the success stories. Nate, we're never going to see you again. So unless I, as the DA, make an effort to bring people like Nate to my office to talk about their successful rehabilitation, and other men like Nate, unless I do that, even if I do that, it's still not going to be enough to counteract the day-to-day experience of prosecutors who by definition are seeing people that keep committing crimes. And so I just think that's something for all of us to keep in mind in terms of trying to promote reforms like this, which the data and the evidence shows that these reforms are very successful. They keep crime low, they save a lot of money. But what we're up against is that we keep seeing in the criminal justice system the failures. And so it takes a concerted effort to try to show people the successes, to try to bring the good news to people so they'll be open to giving people second chances.
Mm-hmm. And I like to say that's why I love George Gascon, former San Francisco DA. I was on his advisory council, so I was interacting with him. But more importantly, that's true what you just said. They're not going to tell my story. So guess what? When I first came home, I put on a suit and I went to the state capitol and I talked to all of the Republicans. I told them I told them my name. I had committed a serious felony. I rehabilitated myself. I told them about all the failure programs within CDC or programs and about my program and walked away, right? And those legislators, everybody I interact with know me. When I go there now, it's like we done created and changed so many laws that they ask us, like, what else can we do for y'all now, right? But it's the relationship of, I'm going in and out. It's a relationship of going, speaking, telling my story. And that's what I did. We went and told our stories and walked away. So the prosecutors, whoever can see Nate Williams, yeah, he came to my office, but he presented himself as a college graduate, as a success story, as opposed to turning on TV, seeing me in the back of a police car, which you're never going to see. You know, that's the only way they'll show me is in the back of a car. But we took it to him like that. That's how we did it.
Thank you. One question that I've seen multiple times in the chat is how this legislation, and this applies, I think, to David, your cases as well, even though the same law doesn't exist in Ohio yet, how you deal with victims who are opposed to release, or say in the case of a homicide, maybe if half the family is opposed and half the family is not. I think I remember reading about Angela Robinson, one of the individuals you helped release. I think half the family initially was opposed and half wasn't. So, curious how you handle those applications, and then DA Rosen, if your office has a policy or if it's case by case.
So in terms of what we're doing in Ohio, well, first thing I'd say is whenever we are dealing with people who've been hurt by crime, we have to be respectful. We have to listen. We have to understand. We have to acknowledge the real pain that is there. That is not going to deter us from taking on certain cases, because we have a different perspective, particularly as we get to know the people that we serve and we see their humanity and we see the progress. And so it is the hardest part of what I do is when I have to talk to family members. Even if they are supportive of release, it is still painful to have those conversations in murder cases. More often than not, we have been successful in terms of not changing anybody's mind, but in reaching out and being able to build support for release. I think there's this myth out there that anyone who has been impacted by a violent crime is automatically going to be wanting the person locked up and the key thrown away. That is true for some crime survivors and some victims, but it's not by any stretch of the imagination the sentiment that is shared universally. So yeah, it's we deal with it very sensitively. We continue to handle the cases because we are representing human beings who are locked up and have been locked up too long. And hopefully we get the support of victims' families, and sometimes we do, sometimes we don't.
So I strongly agree with what David just said. First of all, in terms of the second look releases, we haven't yet had a situation where a victim or a victim's family was opposed to what we were doing. However, in a prosecutor's office, we're constantly saying no to people, right? A lot of times we're saying no to defendants' attorneys. No, we're not going to dismiss that. No, well, we're also saying no a lot to crime victims. No, we're not going to charge that offense. No, we're not able to charge anything. No, we're going to resolve this case for X and not for what you're looking for. So we are used to saying no to people. We actually train new lawyers. We used to have them do a skit about how to say no, because for anyone who has children, you can say no to your children in a lot of different ways. And so we listen respectfully. And if we do say no, and if we are disagreeing with the victim, we do that very respectfully, very empathetically. We don't do things behind victims' backs. Absolutely not. Never do that. Why? That's not respecting them, right? This process about giving second looks is about upholding respect and dignity for everyone, for the inmates and for the victims. So I think that as we broaden the cases that we're looking at in our office, we certainly may come across cases where victims disagree. We're going to listen. We're going to explain why this is the approach that we're taking. And of course, if they want to come to court and object to what we're doing, we will, of course, let them know when the court appearance is so that they can do that. As the DA, we represent the people, the community. We're not just the victim's lawyers. Absolutely not. And so we have to do what we think is in the best interest of justice for everyone in the community. And partly because we're not personally invested in a case as the victim's family, we're able to do that a little bit more dispassionately and objectively. But I want to make something very clear. While we make our decisions more dispassionately, objectively, reasonably, we do not make them in a cold way. Okay? Making it dispassionately and objectively does not mean that we're cold and we're harsh and we're sort of pro forma with the victim. Absolutely not. We are as kind as we can be. And if people are angry with the decisions that we make, which they sometimes are, we understand that. We don't respond in kind, and we try to be as compassionate as we can.
Thank you. Hillary, have you dealt with any cases where a victim or a victim's family was strongly in opposition of release, and if so, how did you deal with that?
As DA Rosen said, I mean, that really is sort of in the purview of what the DA's office will do with our cases. What I will say is that I have had the opportunity to sit pre-COVID in victim offender dialogues inside the prisons. And so I have witnessed victims wanting to better understand some of the childhood experiences and victimization and all of the other drivers of why the crime was committed to begin with. I think a lot of times, just from what I observed in those spaces, victims want more answers. And I think that it can also have a healing effect for victims to know that this isn't just some monster. This is somebody that had a lot of trauma of their own, and they didn't have the coping mechanisms or skills to deal with it in a productive way, or resources to deal with it in a productive way. And so we share with the DA, who then shares with the victim, the same information that we're providing to the DA's office, information about the incarcerated person, what their childhood experiences were, what led them to these decisions, what they were going through at the time. And then usually, most of the people that we're working with have done a ton of work and insight work around accountability and remorse. And so they've written these beautiful letters that are real and true, as DA Rosen said, about their journey and about their accountability, and are able to sort of profess their remorse for the crime that they committed, and a reckoning that they have had with their actions and the rippling effect on the victim and on the community. So all of that information gets passed on to the victims. And I think that for most of the cases, the majority of cases, the victims have said, wow, that's amazing. That's great. That's a lot of work. They've been in there for that long. We haven't had a situation yet where a victim has been really, really opposed to the person being released. But I think that what we're hoping for is that if there are instances like that, that we might be able to apply transformative justice, restorative justice principles to maybe be able to support some healing. I think, as a lot of the viewers know and a lot of the panelists know, there are a lot of victims that don't necessarily feel that the way that their case was handled or their experience through the criminal justice process, made them whole again. And so if there are opportunities as we all come back together and look back at the case and look back at the person and look at the person today, there could be those opportunities for that additional healing for victims as well.
I would like to add to it. That's what I do a lot with a lot of women and families that have went through similar situations. Maddie Scott out of the Bay Area is one of the most powerful, profoundest lady I've ever met. Her grandson was murdered, but me and her and I speak the victim and the perpetrator relationship. Yeah, I was, like I said, my father was an alcoholic. He used to beat my mom, police in the house. When I was 8 years old, he said, beat a mom. He said, be the man of the house, take care of your mom and your sister. He moved back to Alabama where he came from. I was raised in Compton. So when he left, I didn't understand what divorce meant at 8 years old. I thought he didn't love me either. So when he left, I didn't love him either. But what's a man? I thought being a gang member was a man, but that was a wrong choice. I went to jail for stuff I did do, and then people was helping me, correcting me. But then I was arrested.
Sorry, Nate, I think you might be freezing again.
For a crime I didn't do, off in the criminal activities. But yeah, I was arrested for a crime I didn't do. Wait, let me do this. So I was arrested for a crime I didn't do, which really made me give up. There's a difference when you do a crime, and there's a difference when you're innocent of a crime. When I was innocent of this crime, I was like, my uncle was telling me to help me do good. I was doing real good. And this lady told these police, that's not him. He is too light-skinned. The guy that did it was dark-skinned. So they knew I didn't do it. But I was tricked and crossed up in the courtroom. And this played a part in who I became, because once the system gave up on me at 12 years old, I just went off into a dark area that I'm just coming back to. And I shouldn't have to have went through that experience, right? I should have never have been arrested for a crime I didn't commit it. I shouldn't have been going through trauma at that age. The school should have, the school knew the school at 8 years old to 12, the school knew I was having a lot of problems, but they knew it wasn't school. Nobody asked, okay, we know you're not doing your work. It's not school. It must be in your home. Nobody asked what was going on it was trauma in my home. And I'm going to say this, and I'm going to back up. I always say, hurt people, heal people, heal people. I was hurt. Like a lot of people that's in jail and prisons, the majority of those people have childhood experiences of undealt with trauma, just like mine. But I say hurt people, hurt people. I also say heal people, heal people. I healed myself. Now I'm able to heal other people. And I've been given a second chance at life out here in society. My victim haven't. And I feel today, if anybody should have died, it should have been me, because I didn't have the right to go do what I did. But I can't change that. And that's the reason why I do a lot of the work that I do. People always ask, like, Nate, you can just go on with your life. You don't have to go back in prison, juvenile hall or prisons. Well, yes, I do, because I did a lot, and I can't bring that part of that victim back. I can't correct that. And this is my way of doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Nate. I think a lot of people in the are starting to realize that there should be a space for second chances and looking at rehabilitation within prison. And so on that note, I'm wondering, David, if there's any momentum in Ohio to pass a law similar to what we have in California, and then Hillary, if there are any efforts that you're aware of in other parts of the country to pass a law sort of like the one that you and DA Rosen helped pass in California.
So in terms of Ohio, we're building up to it. We are beginning conversations with key legislators. Hillary and I have actually talked about working together to bring to Ohio what she was able to get to happen in California. So we'll see, but we're at the early stages, and for us right now, getting the stories told and softening the ground is really critical. And so a lot of our focus is on doing that right now as we build towards really pushing for some legislation.
Yeah, I was going to say, Alissa, that Ohio is on the list of the next places to hopefully be able to replicate this law. We're really pleased to learn, and maybe some of the viewers have heard from I think that DA Satterberg is a panelist or involved with IPP. But so Washington has just passed a law that is modeled after our California DA resentencing law. And then we're really thrilled to be partnering right now with County Attorney John Choi, Ramsey County Attorney John Choi, in working on legislation in Minnesota. But, you know, as I mentioned earlier, there's been all types of DAs in counties across the country that have been doing and trying to do what DA Rosen did with the Arnulfo Garcia case, is trying to find the workaround, right? We know that conviction integrity units, you know, those have gained popularity in the last sort of decade, I guess. Still more work to do in that regard, but that has gained popularity. There are DAs that are now comfortable with looking back and recognizing that mistakes have been made. But again, those are more in the narrow innocence cases or wrongful conviction cases. But any DA that is looking back at sentences, they're confronting the sentences of the people that don't fit within that constitutional sort of narrow framework, and they are questioning whether they're going to do a legal fiction or figure out some other kind of workaround. So, you know, we're really here as a resource to any DA's office out there that is trying to figure out, is there a law on the books that could be easily amended? Are there different types of workarounds that can be used now to be able to provide relief to people that are in prison, suffering, need to be released and brought home immediately? And again, I think that there are a lot of different ways that DA offices could immediately start to do some workarounds. I think Dan Satterberg is a good example of joining in commutation requests or filing support for people getting released at parole, or some of the kind of easier ways to join in getting people home. But we're hopeful to support any DA office, any state legislature out there that wants to replicate this law in their home state.
Thank you so much. So it is 1:02, or I guess 10:02 a.m. for the California folks. I want to thank you all for participating. Thank you for our audience members for watching. And if you haven't already, please sign up for our email list at www.prosecution.org so you can stay updated on what the IEP is doing and future panels like this. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a wonderful week. Bye-bye.